Good evening, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. We would like to thank you for your interest into joining our webinar. We welcome you into this webinar in order to talk about the proposal development, how to integrate safeguarding into this. It would be for an hour. We're going to ask some of our guests some questions, and we will allocate some time for the answers in this webinar. The experts will be discussing the integrating safeguarding into proposal development for civil society organizations in Yemen by providing certain points of how to integrate safeguarding, how you can integrate that into your own institution, and also the proposals about the costs of safeguarding and how to budget that and some indicators related to it. I would like to welcome you. My name is Rania. I'm the representative of the RSH Yemen. Before we start with our experts, I would like to remind you about the definition of safeguarding, which is prevention of any kind of harm to people and environment when giving aid or help. Because sometimes you know that giving help and response may actually lead indirectly to some harm. So although people working in aid and humanitarian work may actually conduct may have some conducts that will be harming those vulnerable people. That's why there is the RSH was designed specifically in order to safeguard any kind of harm to any person, because these kinds of assaults actually may actually are considered the most harming, because it has to do with people who are vulnerable and especially children, and it actually affects the trust that people put in to people and in organizations and humanitarian organizations. That's why it's really important. Now let's welcome our guests, and they are Ms. Widad Jarrah. She is the executive representative of RSH MENA, and she is an expert in safeguarding and protection, more than 17 years experience in this field. She had PhD, she had a master's degree and BA in this topic. So she is part of the list of the social psychological Sweden Church committee, and also she has worked in this field in the MENA region for so long. And also please welcome Mr. Jamil is Abdu Ali. He has more than 22 years experience in humanitarian and developmental projects, more than 15 years in management. He has master's degree in project management, and he is the executive director of Tamdeen Youth Foundation that actually leads the development and citizenship in Yemen, and he works closely with RSH and NEAR network and other platforms, local and international. Welcome, everyone. Let's start our webinar with Ms. Wajdan with a brief about these points. First of all, an overlook about how to integrate safeguarding, and then she will talk about the steps of how to integrate safeguarding into proposals and some indicators that will be that must be actually integrated, and then in order to ensure safeguarding and monitoring it. Thank you, Rania, and welcome everyone. Good morning, everyone in Yemen and in everywhere. And we have people from Iraq, Jordan. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. In fact, before we talk about how would I have a project or proposal development, integrate safeguarding in it, I would like to say that when we talk about developing a project or doing any proposal is an important part of the cycle of project management. It's actually the vision when the actually idea starts and is been written on paper first. So those who have attended before, in order for you have to full picture, you would have to review with us the cycle of the programs for those who have missed our previous webinars. As for safe programming and how to integrate that into proposal development project proposals, it's everything that you can do or you can avoid during writing. So it would actually eliminate harm and will consult societies. That is safeguarding. So anything that prevents harm includes all kinds of harm that has to do with sexual assault, exploitation, and abuse. I will have to point out that the more we talk about safeguarding when we do the proposal and when we do the planning of the project, will actually spare a lot of problems to this organization that may come emerge later when there is any response to giving services, for example, raising awareness. So safeguarding will be part of it. So it's necessary for all institutions talk about and think about including safeguarding into budgeting it in the budget and having it as a clear items in the budget. Now, if we want to talk about the stage of securing an award, when you write about it and when you have the proposal going to the sponsors or donors, they start by examining or assessing the proposal by looking at some points. Sometimes it's the donors will have these application forms that they actually ask certain questions about your policies. What do you do in times of if any harm happens? So the donors then review the policies that you have, and then in the discussion also sessions afterwards. And depending on these questions, whether talking about policies or the actions or the action plans or anything that happens during the discussions, they have the assessment of the organization, if it's high, low, or a medium. And we have to point out that we have to mention the risks. There's not a project in any single part of the world, even the most secure and safe countries, that they don't have risks. So it's better for organizations to be actually frank and not actually to exaggerate the safeguarding risks related to safeguarding. They have to mention it. So it's better for the organization to show any kind of risks that they may have or may face, and then to focus on mitigating it and reducing it. Next. Now, how to talk about the proposals. Let's talk about the first step for every project in the beginning. So there's something called safeguarding risk assessment. When we talk about risk assessment, we have to actually vision. We have to imagine. Sometimes, unfortunately, when the call to have the proposals are hurry, we forget about this, especially if we don't have any experience or post activities in the place where we write the proposals. So we forget sometimes the risk assessment. So when we are in the times of writing the proposals, we should have the full information. For those who are writing the proposals, they should have full information. They should be really inquired, fully inquired. Who is this? What's the society? Who are the beneficiaries? Elderly? Are they those with special needs? Women? Are they guests on the land? Are they displaced people? And so on. You have to ask yourself these questions. And their nature, their age group, and also what are the powers. So in the environment, are they people who are locals? Are they displaced who are just guests coming to the, for example, the village? Is the place in a safe area in which they wouldn't be actually facing some physical harm? Is the environment be accessible or not accessible? In general, anything related to the environment. These kinds of thinking are important to help me the criteria for the beneficiaries that will be benefits from the program. So it's talking about, we're talking about environment, time, place, the people, who, which, why, and all items or factors that actually may affect. And then I will have the risk assessment. So when we talk about risk mitigation, for example, if my project involves a youth center or social psychological services in a conservative society. So I would just make sure that for girls, the activities for girls should be different than the activities given for boys. As for the children, there should be, for example, consideration about the place that children would go. Is it safe for them to, for the transport to come to the center? These are just examples. Or if it's just giving aid and distributing food, if there are food, maybe I would just distribute the points in which, or the areas in which I would distribute this aid and have transportation for people to come and have access to the aid or to the food. If it's if the project is directed to women, then I would just have to make sure that if she have kids, if she's breastfeeding, if she's an elderly, if she's a, so I have to have like a substitute for those women to come on the behalf of these women. So it depends on the nature of the project or the program. If it's in a, if it's, for example, in a place far away, the distance should be considered. If it's in the morning or if the activities are done in the evening, we have to make sure of all these factors. This is according to the nature of the activity. There are a lot of things, by the way, it's just in short, but maybe my colleagues will have more examples and later when we discuss these issues. So when we write the proposal, we have to take into consideration so many things. So this is risk mitigation. And again, talking about who, when, why, when, and so on, all these questions. Now I'm going to move to the third step, which is talking about how can I include safeguarding activities and costs. So when I am talking about, I know all the risks, I know everything, but what about the budget? What about the costs? I will have to take into consideration, for example, do I have an officer, an employee to actually follow up with these costs and safeguarding? Do I have a complaint mechanism and also, and will have someone to develop it? This is a cost for the institution. If there is a complaint mechanism, do people know about it? Do people were consulted about it? Then I will have to do this. If it's not, what about the transportation? Actually having focus groups, communicating with people, calling people. all these activities related to costs. If we are talking about the complaint, who is the employee or officer responsible for this? Will I actually be part of HR or other departments? Will I need, for example, a certain software, certain program, laptops, for example, that will actually can protect the information of the beneficiaries, the database? If it's, for example, has to do with the breastfeeding women, I should have a transportation costs for the women and children to arrive. If I don't, I will go back to the first step and take this into consideration. Certain, we all know the problems local institutions and sponsors to have the overhead. So actually, sometimes when you have less employees, sometimes it's really difficult. So I have to take into consideration every single thing related to the costs and the budget in order to spare additional costs for my institution. So when we talk about activities and costs that I should attach, but sometimes could be, for example, simple things. For example, if I have found that I have 15% of the local community has a certain degree of special needs, then I will have to have certain clinic, or I should have started to make the place accessible for those with special needs, so they can have access to my institution. So the toilets, the entrances, the doors, everything. So this is also related to costs. So when I take care of all this, and I've written all this on paper, and then I will have the fourth step, which is I have to think about writing safe. So, for example, the partners, when we talk about partners, the suppliers, those who provide logistic services. Usually we ask people to help in the project to actually integrate or interact directly with the beneficiaries. Sometimes they would be partners or contractors. If they are either, then there will be some kind of face-to-face interaction with the beneficiaries. Are there any, let's say, contracts or agreements that I actually let those partners and contractors assign, so they will have to respect my policies and the code of conduct? It's the partner that I've dealt with. Did I deal with him before he deals with my beneficiaries? Is the team of the partners, is everyone in the member aware? So if they're not, sometimes the harm could be caused by people who are ignorant, not necessarily people who do it on purpose. So are they all fully aware of the code of conduct or my agreements and policies? Not necessarily they are partners or contractors. They could be, like, for example, people who have restaurant owners that have actually to send some sandwiches to the beneficiaries, and he would just actually distribute face-to-face physically to the children. So in my proposal, do I have any consideration into those people interacting directly and dealing directly with my beneficiaries? Because having any of the contractors or partners, are all of them, these are all costs. When we do, the institution should early as possible have considered all these costs. Posters, costs of posters, workshops, etc. All of these. The institution should always have a certain percentage. We call it like emergency kind of, in case I needed to move someone who had faced harm. I needed to refer him to a place. I needed to provide him with social or psychological support. There should be some costs allocated to these for these cases. Next, Now, we're going to show simply how the budget might be. So designing things that has to do with IT, training employees, costs for the society, for complaint mechanism, maybe things that I've forgot to mention in the budgeting step. So if I don't have a certain system or program or HR program, I may actually refer to someone outside or outsourcer to actually make sure that those who I assign or I do agreements with don't have any offense, and they are actually qualified to deal with my programs. These things should be included in the budget. And again, maybe some of the colleagues may add certain points, and this is only part of it. So at the end, in any proposal, there should be some indicators that will actually show me how for example, the activities that were included in the proposal, that were included in the safeguarding risk assessment. Who can actually identify the risk assessment? If I do a focus groups, I can have some focus groups that actually help me. I can actually consult. They can consult the local communities. I can also do. There are some indicators have to do with risk mitigation, like the plans, having, for example, a bus to, for example, having medical care. All of these things are indicators for safeguarding activities. We have to have a mechanism. Is there a reporting mechanism where the staff trained on this mechanism? Were there any assessment for it? This all should be included in the indicators. This is generally what we can do in early stages, and I'm sure that my colleagues will give us even more resources to use. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Rania. Thank you, Wajdan, for your information and sharing your experience with us. Now I would like to call Mr. Jamil to open his camera. So I would start actually the conversation with him about his experience as a executive conductor of his institution or foundation, Yemen Foundation. Like, so what is your point of view as a director of a youth center in Yemen? So what's your experience regarding having a budget? How do you include safeguarding in your budget, and what actually have worked for you while doing some projects? Thank you, Rania. So as we are a nonprofit organizations and we focus on safeguardings, we have certain challenges when we talk about budgeting. One of the biggest challenges that we have is, like, usually we don't know the cost that we need to have to spend in order to have the risk mitigation for beneficiaries, because sometimes the abuse or the assaults can have different forms, and the costs related to it can be actually complex and varied. That's why it's really important. You should have a budget that can actually be enough for all of these challenges that you face. And we've also found that when you have safeguarding, including safeguarding in the action plans are really important. And you should have a detailed costs for that, especially any additional resources that would actually be given to people who have faced harm. And also for risk assessment. So Ms. Wajdan actually clarified the importance of risk assessment in safeguarding when doing the proposal. So when you have a safeguarding a budget, you have to think about the problems that will come or emerge when you have not enough or not efficient budget. And you have to make sure that you have enough resources that will actually mitigate the risks. And it's really important to have risk assessments in order to make sure that the risks should be efficient to reduce it or to get or eliminate it. And risk assessment should also take into consideration any budget that actually may increase harm. For example, not having enough officers. So safeguarding budgeting is really essential part in the proposals. And also allocating some funding and resources in order to eliminate these risks. We also found that as Tamdeen, as budget, we actually take into consideration the policies or the trends of the sponsors. Sometimes the sponsors don't agree on having budgets for safeguarding, or if they allow, it's only very limited. So it's not enough. So it's not, they don't do it on purpose, but this is their, they have certain point of view that is different than us having. That's why preparing a risk assessment clear and actually accurate that will actually strengthen the status of the institution when its budget is being assessed. So without these officers, without the civil society can't actually develop its budget and its safeguarding. And when doing depending on risk assessment, having risk assessment for every item used in the budget. So we have worked a lot to have this peace culture inside our institution. We have had some policies related to safeguarding, and we have what allowed us is actually to have certain proposals, and we have also found that it's really important to have safeguarding in the proposal in order to identify any problems or risks. And there should be a timeline or a timing plan in order to have efficient risk assessment. Thank you, Mr. Jamil, for your answer and sharing your experience with us in this regard. Before I ask you the second part of the question, I would like to remind you that if any of you you can add your question in the Q&A box, and then we will answer your questions in the last 10 minutes of our session today. Now, let's move. Since you've talked about the risk assessment, I would like to ask you, from your experience, what were some major challenges that face NGOs or local institutions in Yemen of having costs for safeguarding? And let's talk about also the recommendations. So what are the risks that or challenges that face in providing safeguarding costs, and how can you solve these challenges? Major challenges that would actually face civil societies in Yemen is actually so having less budget actually is the major fact. There is like very limited funding for these societies. So it makes it harder for them to reach into efficient and enough funding. And this actually leads to a limited capacity for them to provide for their services. And also, actually, the political situation in Yemen actually had a great effect on their efficiency. And it led to more risks, more abuse, and more assaults, which made it harder for the civil societies to actually have safeguarding measures. And there was limited access to a database, and actually made it then complex to have safeguarding approaches. Limited access to how safeguarding abuses related to harm and so on made it actually, and this led to weak assessment for safeguarding indicators. So not having access to enough information and database made it harder for them to have approaches or to have initiatives for safeguarding. And lastly, not having enough training was a major challenge for the civil societies because there aren't enough resources to safeguarding, and actually made it low capacity for them, and this made exploitation increase, and the monitoring of the exploitation actually was decreased. We can actually have these recommendations. First of all, it's really important to have sponsors funding for these civil societies that provide safeguarding, which is allocating certain and enough budget in order to have their work done, and ensuring that these civil societies have the enough experience and expertise in order to have the safeguarding applied, and maybe providing programs and training for its members in order to understand the problem clearly. It's really important also to qualify these civil societies, including to have a legal protection for these civil societies in order for them to perform their work. And lastly, it's really important to ensure that civil societies in Yemen have enough support, so they have enough resources, so they can have vital work. Lastly, there are a lot of major challenges facing these civil societies in Yemen, NGOs in Yemen, when we talk about safeguarding. So we have to make sure that civil societies in Yemen or NGOs in Yemen are capable better in order to face these, to have enough resources for safeguarding. Thank you, Mr. Jamil. Now let's also call to answer the third question, Ms. Wujdan, trying to join us, because I want to ask it to Mr. Jamil. If you would like you to allow. So I have a question for you both. And I would like to remind those people who would like to ask questions, you can include it in the Q&A box, because we have short limit of time. We're not going to open it, but we may answer some questions if you put it in the Q&A box. Ms. Wujdan, we have listened to some problems in Yemen from one of the civil society organizations, which is Tamdeen. So but in your perspective as a regional perspective, so the question is directed to you and to Mr. Jamil, but I will start with you. What is your call to the sponsors and the partners that you would like to send them a message through this webinar in order to support civil societies in having boards or funding for the safeguarding? Thank you. This question is actually a challenging one. There are certain networks. We have always communication with international institutions, civil communities, and also the sponsors. We are kind of in the middle. I would like to point out that safeguarding issue is not a separate project by itself. Safeguarding is not something that I would just implement. Safeguarding are conduct and humanitarian measures that should be actually included in all kinds of aid, whether emergencies or recovery or development, whether, for example, I'm distributing food or giving medical care or education, providing or even youth work. So if I'm talking about why do we have humanitarian aid in the first place, it's because, first of all, my feeling that I'm a human, I need to help others, and also my feeling that I have the accountability and the responsibility. So if I'm talking about humanitarian principles and if I'm talking about accountability, so safeguarding is part of it, the crucial part. So as any sponsor or any institution should not actually, even if they how big they are, they shouldn't actually agree on any program or project without safeguarding. This is my point to even international institutions, which sometimes they also do ask us for sponsors and funding or donors. These any kind of a humanitarian aid should be actually accountability, and there should be dignity, and we don't sponsor, we don't divide our donors into different types. There are donors who are well informed and aware and who have money, and there are donors who have knowledge, but they don't want to give money. And there are donors who don't have any, who are ignorant. For those ignorant people, they may be private sectors, private. So as an institution, international institution or local one, I should have, or as when I have to deal with people, sponsors or donors who have budgets, I have to be more frank, because I should increase the percentage, because sometimes the harm may have actually more cost, and safeguarding sometimes doesn't need any cost, doesn't need like $500 or $600 a year. Safeguarding is a measure and it's implementation. So my message to the donors that they shouldn't be enough for them to only assess the budget for those really minor and small projects. All these, any project or any program should have their own budgets. From your advice that us NGOs would like to give to the donors. So after we heard from Ms. Wajdan, we would like to hear from you, Mr. Jamil. What's your advice that you would like to give to NGOs, as NGOs, to donors in Yemen, so that it's important to include safeguarding issues in the budget and the proposals? There should be some ensuring for the donors and the partners, and they should have also resources and budget. For example, it's really necessary to allocate certain percentage from the budget that will be allocated to safeguarding measures to ensure implementation of safeguarding measures. It's also important that the budget should mention clearly there should be costs for research and assessment, and also includes development and applying strategies and policies, and also should have include the costs of developing policies and implementing them. It's important for the donors to look at safeguarding issue as an important, and they shouldn't ask the NGOs or local NGOs to take certain policies, their own policies, either in training or even in the funding. It's important for the donors to include safeguarding budget for the local NGOs, they have to offer safeguarding budget to all proposals, even if the donors, they have to add it. And through the discussions with the donors, they will be convinced to include it. If the some supporting mechanisms were actually included or mentioned through assessment, risk assessment, and also through the way to view the budget. Sometimes the donor may actually accept the safeguarding budget, but sometimes the way you show, the way you discuss it is not really efficient, not without any efficient evidence to convince the donors. So it's really important to look at this matter. Thank you so much, Mr. Jamil and Ms. Wajdan, for your recommendations that we would like to donors to listen to. So these are two different viewpoints from locally and regionally. We have about 10 minutes that we can actually allocate to answer some questions that were added in the Q&A. So Ms. Wajdan, if you would like, there are many questions that some of them we can actually answer. A question related to the recording of today's webinar and everything we have mentioned in this webinar. We will share it with you guys directly through emails or on our own website. Ms. Wajdan, from all of you have mentioned is really important. But how can you reflect all that to the donors and convince them? It's important for them to include safeguarding in the proposals because we have difficulties doing this. Is there any platform, shared platform that we can calculate or have this shared document that would actually clarify for the donors the importance of safeguarding, including safeguarding in the proposals? Yes, this is sometimes we would say that some donors have the knowledge and they have the preparedness and they are prepared, and some donors have the knowledge but they're not prepared, and the most difficult ones are the donors who don't have the knowledge and they're not even ready to give the budget. So for those who don't know, we should actually inform them. As for if I remember the question, because I've looked at another one. Is there any way we can have a shared document or a shared platform? As Resource and Support Hub, we are considered as a center for everyone. And we talked with donors directly. And some of the things that happened in Syria, in Jordan, we had these discussion sessions with donors, international institutions, and local institutions. And we had discussion management. What are the requirements of donors and how we would help the response? And what were some challenges that would prevent the response from local institutions? We can do that in Yemen also. And as for our daily communication, we are talking about all kinds of donors. We talk to everyone, and we talk also about the challenges in our sessions almost weekly. So even with sometimes with international institutions and sometimes with, we talk with international institutions and with donors. And yes, when we talk about Resource and Support Hub, we have many tools that we actually use to communicate. And this is also part. So the donors are actually looking at your chat, looking at, and everyone is asking us about it. So if we have a platform, as a platform, we consider ourselves you guys. So if you have, you want to propose conferences, partners, Rania is available there, and she's very active. She can work with this, with you on this. Although you have to know that in Yemen, especially, there is support group that you can have. So there are advocacy group that you can actually use their help. And as a center, as a hub, we have the capability also to help you design. And I made this help. I hope this helped you. There's another question that was asked. Is it enough to actually have training for the employees who are who are related to the project? Is this enough? Safeguarding is not training. Safeguarding is about the ethical commitment with the institution that they have to take into consideration to all their interactions with every single one. And these all should be practices. This is the practice. So raising awareness and training is only part of it. What if I don't get the award? The importance of having, you have to remember that you are actually responding, even if you don't have money, you are actually responding as a human to your brothers in humanity. You have to consider this put this into consideration. And then I would later actually help as much as I can, even if I didn't get help. So it's a part of how am I held accountable in front of my society, even if I don't have. If we go back to history about the humanitarian aid, when we had a charity 300 years ago, there was protecting and safeguarding the vulnerable. That was actually the basic idea. We have to always remember that. Mr. Jamil, same question I've asked Mrs. Wujdan. Since you have benefited from, did you have, what were your measures that you have taken safeguarding training as actually to create this safeguarding culture that should be to have a secure environment for all employees and workers? We have to actually thank the support hub, because they were the only first ones to actually take care of it, and gave us a lot of support gave support to a lot of institutions in Yemen. Sometimes through training, we started the stage of preparing policies in cooperation with the support hub, and we had actually allocated an officer to work on this. Regardless, there is support actually been given to the management for the programs. To develop the basic levels, if it's not supported from the donors, in order to mitigate the risks to the lowest level possible. So developing policies, training officers, including that safeguarding budget in the budget, safeguarding costs in the budget. Also for the feedback, complaint mechanism related to mechanism. These were identified. Some officers were actually appointed to actually receive complaints in different offices, in our different offices. And there was a committee assigned for investigation in all complaints that has to do with safeguarding. And it's independent. And they have their own reports that they refer to the higher management. This is part of our trends in order to implement the safeguarding measures in order to protect its beneficiaries and officers. Thank you so much, Mr. Jamil. We have 2 minutes for the questions and answers. So if you have any, would like to answer any of the questions before we go to the last part of this webinar. There's a question, can it be included in the monitor and assessment activities? How can we have safeguarding in all of the stages? Yes, you can include it. So we talk about safeguarding. We have a module. How you can have, so we have 4 steps to include safeguarding in all areas. You can have this, you can look at it from our website. You can actually contact Rania in Yemen or Umar in Jordan. So if you have any questions related to how to include it, if you want to have a certain format for the policies, even if there were some questions about how you can actually fill out policies, our colleagues in Jordan and Yemen can actually help you in this regard. So is it for every institution? It has its own policies. I can talk about it because safeguarding actually tries to prevent any harm, physical or psychological. So, and especially sexual exploitation, abuse, and assault. So for every institution, they have their own code of conduct and safe instructions, general safe instructions. Can you actually evaluate, or sorry, have such webinars, especially in certain organizations in Yemen? Of course, yes, we should have, and I think you can contact Rania for this regard. As for the people in Yemen, you can contact me or contact our hub by email that I've written on rania.aljabiri@.org.uk. You can also benefit from the services related to Ask an Expert, also other services that have to do with developing and empowering NGOs and civil societies in regards of buildings, policies related to safeguarding. So thank you for all of those who have attended. Thank you to Mr. Jamil and Ms. Wajdan for their being here today in our webinar related to safeguarding. Thank you all. Thank you all.